The subject of whether or not the Rolex Submariner is the best watch of all time is one of the oldest and least original questions that still have to be addressed in the modern day and in the world of luxury watches. The luxury world wants to know this, and it seems like a no-brainer of a question to ask, doesn't it? What difference has this watch made in the world, and how is it seen all around the globe as a result of its increased prominence? More specifically, how has it modified the panorama of our watch interest? Welcome to the luxury world. Get inspired with us today and tomorrow. In this another video brought to you by the luxury world, the answers to those questions will be addressed and discussed in detail. So if you want to know more about the Rolex Submariner and probably answer those questions yourself, make sure you stay with us until the end. And as usual, before anything else, don't forget to click the subscribe button to receive updates on our newest videos. There has always been one constant that remains true for most watch enthusiasts who have been involved and immersed in the watch industry over the decades. This is very similar to how we consider the Speedmaster and the Seamaster to be great pieces from which to choose. These watches are the ones that come to mind first when we think of watches. In spite of this, there is another universal constant that exists aside from the value of gravity, and that is the Submariner. Whether we like it, love it, or loathe it, the Submariner is perhaps one of the most recognizable and essential watches in our current day. This is the case regardless of how anyone feels about it. It's impossible to overstate the impact that this watch has had over the past 7 decades. And what's more crazy to consider is that each and every one of us and each and every one of you who's watching this film has had previous contact with the Submariner at some point in your life. Whether or not you've worked with them, seen one in a display case, entertained the idea of perhaps buying one at some point in your life, or discovered a watch that unquestionably drew influence from the Submariner in some manner, shape, or form. Now, Tudor's Pelagos FXD is most likely a recent iteration of the Snowflake Submariner, and it exists since the sub was the first to do this reference 55175514, which pertains to the original Mod Mill subs. This FXD draws its inspiration from these previous characteristics, and as a result, it becomes a modern amalgamation of the answers to the questions, why is the sub great? And is it because it's the progenitor of the foundation that so many watchmakers and brands themselves have built their names on over the decades? Another set of questions include, is it because it was so well planned and carried out that the equation was merely solved from day one? Or is it because it has been so widely discussed that at its heart, it has stimulated the production of some of the most successful assets that Rolex possesses, like the GMT and the Explorer 2? Well, we are all yet to find that out in this video. The success and brilliance of a product like this doesn't come from a single significant milestone. Rather, it comes from numerous. This, in a nutshell, is the secret to the watch's success. And that's why it has become so known today. And that's why we all know a lot about them collectively. Not just the history of the watch, but also the hundreds of reference numbers. Even a random person off the street who has no interest in watches may identify this watch by its name and the brand to which it belongs. Let's do a quick review of some of the most significant cases. And there's a good reason why we're doing this. Don't worry, it won't get too complicated. We will keep it easy. And in all honesty, there are only a few that you really need to be familiar with, which is a good thing. We begin with the fact that the Submariner was initially nothing more than a turnograph, and that this was the foundation that would later branch out to becoming the Submariner and the GMT, as well as the earliest example of the Milgauss. The original turnograph is a fantastic under-the-radar piece, and it has been said that the earliest Submariner was introduced around the year 1953. Divers liked the 50 Fathoms and the Zodiac Seawolf that came out this time, making it one of the first in the world. Then came the 6536, the 6538, and the Big Crown. There were other watches in between, like the 6204, but we won't get too technical. These were the first, the ones that really set the groundwork. And the 6538 was Sean Connery's watch. It was the first Bond watch. Next is reference 5512, which is the first time we saw professional crown guards on a case. Most of these watches had gloss dials, and a lot of them had gilt lettering. The easiest way to tell if a watch is a 5512, at least the later ones, is that they had 4 lines of text on its dials to show that they were made with chronometer-certified movements. The 5513 came out soon after, and it had gloss dials at first, but then switched to matte dials. Because the movements in these models were not verified by a chronometer, they were known for having 2 lines of text. Despite the fact that they were incredibly accurate watches, 1680 was the first Submariner to ever be offered with a date complication. These were famously known as the Red Submariners, because the earliest models would have 1 line of red text on a matte dial. The 14060, which was the epitome of the modern vintage Submariner, arrived in the early 1990s and lasted into the 2000s. Despite having 2 lines of text, these watches were minimalist, evenly matched, and it's a cultural icon. Following that, we had the 16610, which was the date variant of this watch, and then we went to the super cases such as the 40060 and the 116610, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now let's be honest, most of us here know the references of these models like the backs of our hands. They're not hard to follow. The reason the luxury world did that and ran through these models is that that's how we learned to tell one model from the next. And the same way that repetition in design has shown us how this watch has lasted through the test of time. It was never willing to change. Rather, it chose to remain steadfast in its ways and to never conform to the trends and fashions of the time, except maybe going two-tone at that stage. However, this process of gradual evolution rather than revolution has made this watch something unlike any other. This has contributed to its status as an icon. When we look at the current climax of Rolex and the Submariner, we see that both are extremely overhyped. There's no question about this, as advertisements are unable to sell these watches to you. Are there better dive watches available for a fraction of the price? Yes. However, the Submariner has reached the status and a point now where they are unconquerable. This is the wider claim. The popularity and the prominent position in popular culture are both wonderful things. The Submariner's reputation wasn't made up. Advertising might have helped them get their foot in the door, and the romance of owning a watch like this is appealing. But the strong reputation that this watch has was earned with all the opinions we have about Rolex as a brand and how they operate today. And with the people who buy these watches because they like the brand and want to be seen owning the brand. The first half a century of the Submariner's existence solidified its reputation as a tool that has thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of testimonies from owners who have worn them everywhere and have done everything with them throughout their lives. The fact that these owners have not been ever let down by the watch is already half the battle won when it comes to determining the success of a product through user experience. The ethos and principles that came to define Rolex tool watchers were not that of luxury, but of reliance, accuracy, and toughness. Even when we look at the machines of today, we see that they are far more ostentatious, greater in size, reflective, and opulent than ever before. Nonetheless, despite their outward appearance, these machines are still constructed to endure the elements of the outside world. They have the greatest machining and bands created on a bigger scale in the industry and are made from some of the strongest materials. Although the word luxury may be associated with them, they have never abandoned the ethos and purpose of these watches and what distinguishes their approach. Now perhaps, yes, when we look at what Tudor does today, they have picked up where Rolex left off in the 1990s and the early 2000s. They are building the true-to-the-core tool watches of the day. However, when we see that the most popular designs are essentially Submariner-based because the Submariner gave them the template, and when we add that how many popular watch designs today have been influenced by the Submariner, which would say countless, the dots, dashes, and triangle. The standard diving watch uses this format, and you can find it just about anywhere. Some of the most illustrious watchmakers of our time have said that if they could only own one watch for the rest of their lives, it would be a Rolex, and the name Submariner is thrown around as carelessly as if it were an everyday necessity in the watch hobby, prompting the question, is this watch objectively great, or are we all just hopping on the bandwagon because everyone says so? Even though we now see them as repeated, copied and emphasized, and even though we see so much of it that it can be difficult and tiring to talk about and look at, it's still a piece that was so ahead of its time. From a designer's point of view, even to this day, the majority of people still find the Submariner to be an inspiring watch. The fundamental strategy of selecting shapes rather than numerals to hold the lume on the dial engages a simpler understanding of time telling. It rewrites the book on legibility. Furthermore, the use of appropriate sizes has made this watch accessible to such a large number of people. Then, it describes how it evolved from being a dressy diver into something that had a more professional focus. And ultimately, it draws attention to the contemporary environment that we are presently in, which is one in which a professional stainless steel sports watch is a need. It would appear that it has become one of the most desired add-ons. And whether you like it or not, the Submariner was one of the first components that solidified the idea of all stainless steel, hermetically sealed diving watch that was meant to travel anywhere and to do anything. It's incredible to watch how a single thought can spread like wildfire, and in this case, influence a whole market. It all comes down to a perfect storm, which is what led to the creation of the Rolex Submariner, one of the first dive watches to be sold and also one of the most stylish, useful, and aesthetically pleasing designs of a diver that has ever been conceptualized. Despite constant evolution, its basic layout has changed little throughout the years. Decades of satisfied consumers, massive cultural clout, and an unwavering commitment to quality watchmaking that uses only the finest materials and production processes have all contributed to the brand's enduring appeal. This watch will always be significant, even if the stainless steel sports watch is only a blip on the radar of fashion and culture, since it has a distinct history that will never be forgotten. With all that in mind, the luxury world agrees that this timepiece deserves its reputation as one of, if not the best watch ever made. As we wrap up this video, we hope that you have gained a better understanding of the Rolex Submariner. Please let us know what you think of this video in the comment section below. And don't forget to smash the like button and hit subscribe if you want to be the first to learn about the next amazing luxury item. See you in the next video.